Hi, I'm Seamless, and this is the making of Forever Part 3. This is the mixing and the mastering video. We talk about mixing and mastering. Just want to point out that you can actually purchase this FLP for yourself if you want to have it. It's there for you to get at thefixstore.com/SeamlessR, link in the description of this video. Get the deluxe version is what you want. You can get individual ones if you want, or you can get the whole thing, for a big discount. Anyway, this track, much like the rest of every other kind of part of it, the mixing of it is pretty simplistic, but it's aided by the fact that there's not a lot happening. The less that there is, the easier it is to mix it together, that whole thing. So as much as you might want to try and fix a lot of how things feel with mixing and mastering in your track, you still have to really have to consider the arrangement as part of that. So as usual, when I made this track, I made the drop first and I tried to make the mastering pretty much ahead of time. But this really all began with the drums. A lot about what went on in this track began with the drums, because I really wanted to make the sharpest, tightest, punchiest stuff ever. And I don't know, did a pretty okay job. The sample selection was pretty basic. Just find a cake that's just the most synthetically sharp hitting thing ever. Same thing with the snare. Although in this case, it was mostly just a matter of finding something that was reasonably high pitched and then also just make it shorter. I believe I pitched it up to be a bit better than that. And then the hats themselves are just sparse. Really just super thin stuff. The thing about hats is that a lot of people tend to make the hats way too loud. They tend to make a lot of their high frequency material way too loud. You have to remember that high frequency things require less power to sound as loud as lower frequency things when they move over air. While the levels themselves may be the similar amounts, higher frequency stuff will just sound louder even though they're the same level as lower frequency things. Lower frequency things require a lot more power to sound as in your face as they do, with high frequency stuff. So to that end, mixing high frequency stuff is pretty easy because you can just turn it down and it will still sound pretty present. You have to remember that because a lot of people try to really make the hats and things just super duper sharp. And if you got to reference things, we got to listen to other people's songs, and you have to just try to pick out how loud their stuff is. You'll find out usually that they're usually not that loud, the hats, that kind of thing. So the beat was real sparse because there's this big stop when the snare hits, that kind of thing. There's also I have a kind of wood blocky thing that really doesn't show up until later, when that kind of thing. I just like how that sounds. It's pretty sweet. I also have that ride loop. That was from, it was either Superior Drummer or a bunch of other, I think actually might have been some of the rides that are in FL. I just kind of put together, made a loop, and individually sidechained them just to kind of feel a bit better. As far as the mixing goes, though, these guys all came together, a loop included, and into the drums bus where it's being compressed, but not kind of like the usual compression. There's actually almost no compression happening at all. There's some multi-band compression, but it's really just kind of leveling, and the compression itself is very slight. So you can see this here. You can think of this as the threshold being here, and then the ratio being whatever this is, and you can see that for the highs and the mids, they're not really a lot. And in fact, the lows are mostly just kind of bringing it up, and some of them are above 0 dB, some of them are not, that kind of thing. And the master is not compressing at all. And the reason for that is that I really wanted the peaks to be kind of uncompressed, but still very punchy. But the punchiness is not actually from the compression. The punchiness is from just the fact that the samples themselves are short. And then I want the peaks to this amount of this kind of behavior to be what goes into the master channel to interact with everything else. And there's really not all else to that. When you pick your snare sample, you pick your drum samples, and you pick what you gotta do, the EQ and that kind of thing. There's not a lot of science to that. It's really just kind of do them until they sound like the way you want them to make. And then you kind of put them together with other stuff, and then you do all the other changes to try and make them sound right against that. I tend to mix things to sound good against the drums, not so much to make the drums sound good against the things, because my philosophy is that the drums need to be way louder than everything else, so that when they get crushed together in a compressor, they still punch through everything because they're just so insurmountably louder. And then the rest of the things, there's the various, I tend to separate the two processes of sound design, filtering, and EQing and compression, and then mixing, filtering, EQing, and compression. That's why a lot of stuff was done, in Patcher, but then there's every so often there'll be an EQ in post that's doing very minor, very light things, which you might not see in normal sort of sound design mixer insert if you're not using patcher, because you end up doing both at the same equalizer, which is nothing really wrong with that. But when you look at a much more extreme EQ and you think to yourself, wow, the mix on that is insane, and it's not really, part of that's really not about the mix. That's a lot about the sound design. The difference between sound design and mixing is that sound design, you want to make the thing sound as good as you can possibly get the sound by itself, and then mixing is all about getting it to sound that good when it's also playing against other stuff. That's pretty basic. That's just mixing 101 right there. And then all the decisions that I make about doing that are really just to ear. It's really not that deep. There's really not a lot of like industry secrets about like EQing and stuff like that. You just kind of do it till it sounds right. And then you do it enough times and eventually you kind of learn some tricks that are typical to your style, which is why it really is why I only do mixing and mastering tutorials like this that are in context with something that's already done, because it's a lot of what I've done, while the generalized version of it is me just being like, and I compressed it and then I was done. Like, the decisions about that are going to be unique for every track. So that's hence the big thing that happens with this track is there's a separate sub, which of course you want to do for, you want to have a separate sub, just do that. And of course I have the sidechain channel where everything is coming together, and I am sidechaining it with the Fruity Balance. Oh, but look, you don't see sidechain animation. It's nowhere to be found. How is it doing that? Well, in this case, I'm actually using a envelope controller as triggered when I trigger the kick and the snare. So you can see here that whenever they hit, there's also the hit there. And sometimes I have them happening even without it. Like, what the hell, which one is this? This is pattern 4? Is that this one? Where's 4 show up? It doesn't appear to for kind of a while, but yeah, so it triggers the kick chain and the snare chain, and they're kind of similar. They're not that different, but they're not, it's whatever. This is a lot like how volume shaper works, with the exception that you're not seeing the audio actually in here to guide your chaining. But that's not that a big difference to me. The reason you don't see me do this all the time is because I've done some tests doing this way of doing it versus having actual automation. And I've discovered that doing it this way, you're still kind of stuck with the timing that you get when you're still using the drums. And what I mean by that is that it's not perfectly cut time-wise. And I want them to be perfectly cut most of the time. And and like the differences are like so super minute that like it's really not that big a deal. In fact, the difference between this and just like using the limiter with just the source kick, there are some differences, but the differences are super duper tiny. And again, if you're mixing everything, if you begin your mixing thoughts with your arrangement practices, those minor differences won't ever matter. But if you're trying to fix everything with that kind of stuff, then you're gonna have to care about the minute details. I still prefer to do manual automation with an automation clip in the playlist against what I'm doing. But this actually was a pretty decent way that worked out. The way this works is that there's 2 of these, the kick and snare, and they're both linked to the same Fruity Balance. If you go to the link controller, you can see here there's actually 2 links, and they're both articulator 1 and articulator 1 of the kick and the snare chain. For the automation? Windows? What? Okay. Now, it's kind of hard to tell because it's not really updating very fast, but if we look at something that gives us a metering of levels, we can see that the cut is really, really sharp, which is why I prefer these automation methods versus using a limiter, either the envelope controller or just a straight up automation, because that will take the level down to where you want it to go, and you don't have to worry about it, eschewing itself being stuck to relying on the shape of the original signal. Because you can just shape it the way you want it to go, have it go down as far as you want it to go, and then have the timing be precisely what you want it to be all the time. So like you're in the most control of what's happening, which is what I like in things. So that's why I do that. Now, having done that, like the whole reason why that the sidechaining, and I call it the ducking, because it's actually just ducking at this point. We're not actually using sidechaining at all. The reason that this kind of thing is important is, if you're not clear, is that we're cutting a giant hole in the mix that fits the drums, right? So that means that there's not conflict. This allows us to not have to do sort of like old school mixing techniques where we do things like scoop out the bass frequencies around where the kick comes in, scoop out the main frequency where the snare comes in. Although I did kind of do that, with this here. That wasn't really because of the snare though. That was because it just sounded better when I did. But there was a kind of a benefit of the snare having a little bit more room. I think that's actually where the snare hits. I'm not totally sure. Yeah, right in the middle of 200 hertz. Yep, so that kind of fits the snare, which is funny because most of the time when you hear the snare hits by itself. So that's mostly there because of just the tone. It just happened to be a lined up priority-wise with the snare. And like most of the things that are happening in the mix right now are what's contributing to the song sounding as harsh and sharp as it does. Also, a lot of high-passing things on things that don't require lower frequencies, like the ARPs, the lead, put their leads, that kind of thing. That frees up a lot of headroom, that kind of thing. This is all about creating headroom, and the whole purpose of headroom is that we now have a lot more room to turn stuff up. So in the actual Maximus, I have an EQ, that's like the slightest thing in the universe. And in the actual Maximus up top, we are doing pretty basic compression here. Now, when you see something like this is normal looking compression, right? We're essentially looking at this, we're bringing down, like it peaks up here, we're bringing it down, and then we're using makeup gain in the post to kind of bring it back up. So like it looks like this looks like a pretty normal thing, but then like this looks like I'm really a lot quieter all of a sudden. Same thing on the highs, and it is initially lower, but then we're using the post to bring it back up. And like you can use the display to kind of infer what you're trying to do there, but I mostly just did this to ear. It's important to note that I have a gigantic attack on the mids and the highs. The purpose of attack on the low, mid, and high is that it prevents... You actually zoom in, we can see what happens. You can see here that the compression engages, but it doesn't engage immediately. And it engages at a bit of a slow curve. And the purpose of that is that the right very second where that big transient hits, we hear the actual original transient most of the time. So this preserves ultimate sharpness. In the low, mid, and high, this is all well and good, but like, of course, we're going to limit it when it comes down to the master on the limit there. I'm also monoing the lows, spreading the lows, the mids and highs. This is a mid-side fader, so on the side it's mono, on this side it's more stereo. I'm also spreading the whole thing on the master just because I felt like it sounded better. In this case, I have a pretty big attack here, and then slightly less, not as fast as you might expect releasing the head. Now, if you ever have that muddy feeling in your compression, that if the kind of warble that you get, that's usually a result of what people refer to as overcompression, but really what's happening is that your time variables are not fast enough. There's a sweet spot between not fast enough and too fast, because if it's not fast enough, you get the kind of like not fully sharp sounding thing. If it's too fast, you distort it. In this case, it's rather slow, and I have a big attack too, but the attack does something different on the master than it does on everything else. On the master, what this does is it fully delays the audio, which in this case is delaying it by 5 entire milliseconds. And when the transient hits, it does the scale up of the attack again, but the transient actually turns on right when that scale actually actualizes. So it's a little bit like pre-compression. It's coming up ahead of time to hit the thing. It is look ahead delay, which you might be thinking is what the ahead thing does, but that's not what that does. There's also this elevation delay knob, which is all the way off, and this is look ahead delay for the low, mid, and high altogether, which I'm just not using at all. I'm using a combination of regular compression up here, and then also soft saturation, which is just distorting it. So it's like clipping, but it's not exactly like clipping. Clipping is different just because it's a bit unpredictable about how it's going to sound in different systems, but algorithmic clipping, which is what we're doing here with soft saturation, which is just a kind of distortion, means that it's going to come out in such a way that it sounds more or less like the same thing, but it's controlled, so it'll be reproducible in speakers that have the appropriate frequency range to do so, which is most of them. That's the benefit of doing that. But it's funny, when I first discovered the soft saturation in the limiter, because the limiter does it too, I referred to it to myself as free compression, because I always viewed compression as you paid for it in sharpness. But when you're cutting it off with just distortion, you have all your sharpness because there's no time variables. It happens immediately, but it also distorts. So you have to find a sweet spot of how far above it you want to push it, because the farther above the signal goes above the threshold of distortion, the more distorted it sounds. And the reason why this is able to work at all is because I have a lot of distorted sounds in here. All the loud sounds are all distorted. So adding a little bit of extra distortion doesn't actually sound very bad, because we're just adding higher frequency content to something that's already pretty high frequency content. High frequency content is something that's already pretty high frequency, so we're not really seeing a big damage. But you push it farther, you will eventually hear it as damage to your song. So you want to find a nice middle ground, which is why I like having this combo of not perfectly limiting the compression with the distortion signal here, because this prevents it from going that far above the threshold, and it allows us to still have compression but not be over compressed, quote unquote. So it's the best of both worlds. And that's really all there is to this the mixing wise. This is like the most distilled version of the kind of mixing that I do in my songs. And in fact, if you listen to this without the master effects, you might think to yourself, oh my god, how could you have possibly known that that mix would sound like this when it's mastered? The answer to that question is that I don't ever, because I do the mix and the master at the same time. It's actually a little weird to me that people still want to separate the two ideas. I get why they did back in the day, but even as recently as maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but now there's really no reason to. And especially if you're doing this kind of like really hard-hitting, like super dubstep kind of sort of stuff, like bass music and loud music in general. You're doing yourself a disservice by separating it and trying, especially if you try as hard as you can to make something sound good at the mix side of things, because nothing about like the things that make this track sound good, the weightiness of it, like the crushed feeling of it all. You can try really hard to make that work with a mix without master compression, but a lot of how that feels is because of heavy-handed, weird-sounding, super crushed master compression. Like, that's why these things sound that way. So we have to work the mix around that. And a lot of the things that we do in the mix that make that work with the mastering the way that it is wouldn't make sense to do just as a mix by itself, which is why I do everything together. So everything informs everything else that I'm doing. So it's all a symbiotic relationship of just being the same process, because it is ultimately the same process. Yeah, so if you have any questions about that, let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.